People have never, ever in the history of mankind ever needed fantasy, craved it more than right now. The reason for it is we're all in our phones. We're all in these little tiny worlds. We're reading about what people had for breakfast, as if that's important. We're reading about their travels, their trips, what their grandchildren are doing. Our worlds are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. In the past, we were living in danger. We could die at any moment. Men were traveling on ships to other countries. They were in battles. We had this life, this energy, this adventure. Now we don't have any adventure. We crave fantasy. We crave that in our minds. It's the year 1905, and we're in Paris, France. And word starts spreading of this woman who's a dancer, this exotic dancer, in private homes in Paris. She was supposedly from the island of Java, and she did these weird Javanese dances. She wore these sarongs and these veils that were very revealing, right? She danced in this very undulating, exciting, very erotic way. She had bracelets all around. She had these little things in her hand that made sounds. She had a Javanese orchestra with her. It was a spectacle, but it was only in homes. And people were going crazy over it. Her name was Mata Hari, and soon everybody was talking about Mata Hari. But she only danced in homes, and soon everybody was scrambling to get into these homes. She even danced nude, and so she became the toast of Paris, right? And she gave interviews in which she talked about herself. Yes, I was born on the island of Java. I'm descended from a Javanese princess. I spent time in India. I used to ride horseback with a gun. I would even ride horseback naked. She told all of these stories. People go, whoa, who is this person? What is this woman, right? They were fascinated. Soon she gave public performances. Audience went crazy, thousands of people. She started touring Europe. She became a celebrity. And then, after World War I, or near the end of World War I, it was discovered that Mata Hari was a spy for the Germans. She was tried and she was executed. And after she was executed, they discovered that Mata Hari was actually Margarita Zella, a very boring young woman from Holland who had not a drop of Asian blood in her, right? She had nothing to do with Java. She didn't even know the dances, okay? And so, if you think about this, if you think about it in a new light, she's like this incredible entrepreneur, right? She comes to Paris with like half a franc in her pocket. Most young girls her age were, the only way to get by was to become a prostitute or a courtesan. She didn't want that. She knew that what is power in this world is fantasy. People crave fantasy. Parisians happen to be people who have erotic fantasies, maybe more than Americans, I don't know, right? And they were interested in things Asian, things exotic. She had once seen a Javanese dancer, and people wrote later that she wasn't actually a very good dancer. She wasn't even very pretty. She created this illusion. She played to people's fantasies. She used her veils. She used her movements. She used the interview she created to create this fantastic fantasy that brought her all of this power. Now, I know you might say, well, here in 2024, that's extremely unrealistic. I mean, one Google search, we would have realized she's not Mata Hari, et cetera. It's true. You might also say, come on, people don't want fantasy anymore. They want reality. They want the truth, man. They want things to be authentic. When I hear that, I say, bullshit. People have never, ever in the history of mankind ever needed fantasy, craved it more than right now in 2024. The reason for it is we're all in our phones. We're all in these little tiny worlds. We're reading about what people had for breakfast, as if that's important. We're reading about their travels, their trips, what their grandchildren are doing, right? Our worlds are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. In the past, we were living in danger. There was like, we could die at any moment. Men were traveling on ships to other countries. They were in battles, etc. We had this life, this energy, this adventure. Now we don't have any adventure. We crave fantasy. We crave that in our minds. And that is why you see so much fan fiction. You see so much romance fiction. You see so many things on Netflix that are streaming that are playing to all of these fantasies, all of the Marvel comics and all of that kind of stuff. So there is a hunger for fantasy out there that you must exploit because there is tremendous, tremendous power in it. Now, the thing you have to understand about fantasy is, I don't know what your fantasy is, and I don't know what your fantasy is over there, because it's in your head. I'd have to know you, I'd have to get to know you, and then maybe after I got to know you, then I could maybe try and seduce you or whatever that would be. But I don't know what your fantasies are. But there are fantasies that are cultural, that everybody has, that are a part of the zeitgeist, if you will, the spirit of the times. So in the 60s, the fantasy was sex, free love, Playboy magazine, naked bodies. By the end of the 60s, early 70s, it was being crunchy, organic, back to nature, earth shoes. I don't know if any of you can remember the embarrassment of earth shoes. I even had a pair when I was a kid. Okay, then 10 years later, it was having a pasta machine, an espresso machine. It was yuppies. The fantasies kept changing, so they're constantly evolving. And you have to be in touch with where those fantasies are in 2024. Because there is nothing sadder in this world to be using fantasies that are from 5 or 10 years ago. It's embarrassing, and people will look at you as if something is wrong. If your fantasies are from 30 years ago, that's fine, that's nostalgia. Oh, it's the 90s, it's the 80s, great. But something from 2010, ew, yeah, we're not like that anymore, okay? So you have to understand the zeitgeist, you have to be tuned into it like a laser, and you have to hit those sweet spots. What are the fantasies in 2024? I don't know if I can speak so directly, but I think because people are so virtual and so trapped, and we went through COVID, and our fantasy is to have actual real life, flesh and blood adventures in the world. That it's a fantasy of, we're gonna take you to this country or whatever, or we're gonna bring you to this restaurant, and you're gonna have something real and something not virtual, an experience. A real experience is actually a fantasy, I'm afraid, that you're going to be creating. Another fantasy has to do with health and wellness. You know, people are eating so badly, we're not in good shape, etc. But you have like some magic formula that's going to make people live longer and have energy, etc. I fall for those fantasies all the time. Man, that has great power in it, okay? We live in times of such correctness, such political correctness. Everyone feels so cramped. Oh, I better not say that. I better not do this. I have to be so correct. Taboos, being transgressive, breaking all that crap is a fantasy that people are dying for, okay? So those are some of the fantasies that you have to hit in this world today. And when you create a fantasy, and you're appealing to that in your marketing or whatever, don't worry about the words. The content doesn't matter. It's the visuals that carry the fantasy, right? The colors, the ambiance, the environment that you create. Because we are animals, we are sensual animals. And that's what appeals to us more strongly. I remember once reading about Ronald Reagan in the 80s, and this woman had done a report on him in which she tried to rip him to shreds. She had images of him doing all of these things coming off his plane, and the narration said, you know, Ronald Reagan did this, he did that, as if all the mistakes he made. And later, this reporter, Leslie Stahl, met the Reagan's communication manager. She goes, I hope he's not too angry at me. And Edwin Meese goes, no, Reagan loved it. It was fantastic. It was beautiful. It was like an ad for us. She goes, what do you mean? I ripped him to pieces. She goes, no. You had images of him coming off the plane. He looked presidential. He was meeting foreign leaders. The content didn't matter. The images is what mattered. The last thing I will say about fantasies is myths. For so many years, we humans were fed on myths, grand myths, Greek myths, myths from our past that have a kind of childlike hold on us forever. I mean, I know when I read about Greek myths now, the little 8-year-old Robert comes out. I love it. So when I write a book, I always try and make the mythic associations. So I tell stories, but I don't tell stories about Paul M. working in an architectural firm, drafting this, that, and the other. I read about Louis XIV. I read about Julius Caesar. I read about Napoleon Bonaparte and Cleopatra. And when you read that, you go, hey, I'm acting like Cleopatra. I'm acting like Louis XIV. I'm Julius Caesar. I'm not this guy in an office, whatever. I'm creating mythic associations for the reader that create tremendous amount of power. And I believe that is a lot of the effect that 48 Laws of Power has had.